Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. If you're watching along with the live streams we're doing this week, it's all about looking back on 2024 and seeing what's going to happen in 2025. And I've had Chris Elliott from Restaurants Canada yesterday. I've got Jeff Guignard from Able BC today, and then I've got Ian Torstenson from the BCRFA tomorrow. So we're going to be looking at. But if you are listening to this in the new year, hopefully these podcasts are helping you set up yourself for the new year in 2025, because I'm hoping 2025 is going to be a smidgy bit better than 2024. Thank you so much for your time, Jeff. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. It's really good to see you again, man.
Really good to see you. I feel like I only ever reach out to you to do a podcast when shit's going bad.
Well, I don't know if that's you or so much as it's just been a tough few years for industry.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
Yep.
So the Able BC is a non-profit organization that looks after bars, restaurants, pubs, liquor stores, and cannabis in BC, correct?
That's right. And we also do work on behalf of the liquor licenses in BC's hotels as well. So we are busy.
Yeah, definitely. So let's reflect on 2024, because I recently did a business survey, and the results weren't great. I had like 100 respondents, and the results weren't fantastic either. People were down on top line revenue, which sort of sets the tone for everything else, or up on top line revenue, but down on profit because of the increase in costs.
Exactly.
Would you describe the year for BC hospitality industry? Were there surprises, positives, or challenges? What stands out to you?
Yeah, so it's been a difficult year, right? There's no sugarcoating that. And I think the easiest way to think of it is we are still experiencing the financial fallout from the pandemic, right? We've seen all kinds of changes in consumer behavior. People have less money. We've all dealt with inflation. And it's not just consumers going in. You know, when they go to the grocery store or go to a pub or a liquor store, they see prices going up, which is why our revenue looks like it's up in a lot of cases, right? But we're experiencing those same cost increases when we're purchasing goods as well. So I think if I look back over the year, though, we knew at the beginning of it that this was going to be a transition year. Industry was still trying to recover and change. We were in flux this year. No surprises on that. But it did surprise me how hard profitability has been. It's been extremely difficult for people to make money. As you and I sit here chatting this morning, I know that 40% of BC's hospitality businesses are still not profitable, which is why every single month there's a new article in Vancouver is Awesome or one of those publications with another list of 20 or 30 or 40 of Vancouver's pubs, bars, restaurants, little hole-in-the-wall mom and pops that just can't make it. Now, the flip side of that, though, is I have seen tremendous resiliency from our members as well, and from the hospitality sector. Excuse me. When I look at the beginning of the year, it felt like we were definitely going to lose another 10 or 15% of the industry. We haven't. We have lost some, but it's not been as bad. This is why when we sent out our annual advocacy report, we called this year resiliency in action, because you're seeing people get very innovative in their businesses. You're seeing people work the heck out of it just to try and make it go. But profitability is harder, right? Rising interest rates have put a lot of financial stress on folks because debt is expensive. But that has come with also while all that side of the business has been really tough, you've seen some really interesting innovations in people using, as a hotel, using mobile check-in and digital room keys, right? Like just to try and reduce their waste and be a little bit more interesting for their customers, right? Provide that extra customer service in a way that's novel. So yeah, that's been challenging. Also, a large part of our industry, particularly in places like Victoria and Vancouver, are dependent on the tourism economy as well. And it did surprise me to see the fluctuations in that market, right? And we had a huge amount of pent-up demand in 2023. A lot of that died off, but has started to return in different areas of the province. Business travel is remote work has had an interesting impact on that. So some of those customers are still not back. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's been a challenging year across the board for liquor retailers and the hospitality industry and our cannabis members as well.
You were mentioning inflation and rising costs, and obviously that's been something I've been fortunate enough to sit down with a few business owners and actually look over their P&Ls year over year, and you see the sales going up, but the costs going up and crossing
Yeah.
over that line. Do you see any relief coming shortly on the horizon in 2025?
Well, inflation will stabilize, right? It will, right? If you take the long view and we can zoom out a little bit and kind of get out of our myopic perspective in the moment, this will not last. This too shall pass.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge, though, is that we're paying those bills right now, and no one knows when this will end. And it's difficult to explain it to the customers as well, because although they know, from their own pocketbooks that things are more expensive, when you're starting to ask people to spend $40 on a burger and a beer, it starts to feel kind of like you're ripping them off, right? Because that very same product used to be $20 or $25 just a couple of years ago. We're not, right? We're actually making less profit on those than we used to, not just as a percentage, but in like real dollars on it.
Mm-hmm.
Menu price inflation is not kept up with the cost inflation in our businesses, and that's because we know we already have fewer people coming out. We already have fewer bums and seats, right? And so we're making less money off of less people. So when I talked to some of our members out in, Fernie and Nelson a few weeks ago, they're saying it feels like people come out half as often and spend half as much, right? Even though they're actually probably spending more, it feels like they're spending less because there's less of an impact on your business. Or people are doing things like, they'll come to happy hour instead. They'll share a pizza as opposed to ordering two mains, and right, and they're just adapting their habits a little bit. The only good news on that side, though, is like if you're still in the business now, like the available supply of seats where people can go and eat and drink has contracted, right? We've lost some businesses out there. So there are kind of fewer places for people to go, which means when customers go out, you have a greater chance of getting some of them. And it does feel like you've made it this far. That's a really encouraging sign. And our hope is that, and we were saying this even last year, right? I think at the beginning of the year, and we always anticipated that 2024 was going to be what got us to 2025, because this is the year we expect to finally get out of the darkness.
Talking about tourism, I'm going to bounce around. I got questions in front of me. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Talking about tourism, I've got a hypothesis the last couple of years for tourism, and I have been put on record now saying that a lot of DMOs don't encompass food and beverage enough in their group. Like there's a lot of DMOs out there that do not have someone from food and beverage on their board. So I find there's a lot of messaging about like, oh, hey, there's so many cruise ships we had come in, there's so many planes we had come in, there's so many people we had come in. But when I drive around town and when I talk to fellow operators, they're not seeing that in their business. I see a lot of people in the streets, but I still see empty patios and I see empty restaurants. And my hypothesis behind it is like, especially cruise ships here in Victoria, is the demo that's going on cruise ships very different to pre-pandemic or just after post-pandemic, and they don't have the disposable income when they come off the boat to have a dinner or have a drink. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of drivers in there that we can't understand all of it, but I do think you're correct that customers who are doing those cruises, they're not taking advantage of the excursions as much as they used to, or they're much more price conscious on it. So they're taking advantage of the all you can eat kind of a style of that. But I think there's also just a mind shift that's necessary from the hospitality and tourism industries. Now, hospitality businesses are so focused on just trying to make ends meet and making sure they have enough staff on the line and dealing with, irate customers who are just angry at everything right now. Right, that they don't have time to think about the broader perspective on that. The hospitality industry has always kind of been ancillary to tourism, but we need to shift that perspective sometimes and see that it can take a component of it. Look at what the BC Ale Trail has done for BC's craft breweries, right? That's a partnership with Destination Bank, British Columbia, where you help people who want to come and try some of BC's craft beers organize a little self-tour so they get to go see different experiences in different communities, right, and get to have excellent quality product. Vancouver now has Michelin-starred restaurants. That has been a really big help at that price point, at least, right? Not everybody's going to go and drop $500 on lunch, right? But we have some restaurants at that price point we can now promote that way. I've lived in, I'm from New Brunswick, lived in Ontario, I've traveled across the country. We have world-class culinary experiences here. Everything from affordable pubs to cocktail bars to high end. Promoting those as part of our tourism product would make a heck of a lot of sense. And that extends all the way through to our manufacturing sector as well. But it's definitely challenging because the people aren't traveling as much. We're not getting as many visitors from Alberta as we did last year. People from the States aren't coming up as much. Cruise ship terminals are back, and we have, businesses often like at that level kind of skew their stats a little bit and talk about record revenue. Again, right? A dollar is worth more now than it was a few years ago, right? So saying you've got 20% increase in revenue from last year doesn't necessarily translate to 20% more dollars for you. It just means that it was the inflationary cost drove it up. But yeah, there's a huge opportunity there for us, and doing a better job even of taking the folks who come off the cruise ship and saying, hey, do you know Gastown is right there? Or did you ever get out to Commercial Drive or Main Street in Vancouver and see the different neighborhoods and culinary experiences? And that's something we can all work together on more.
You were mentioning business travel earlier, and it does tie into tourism and remote workers, because you deal with retail as well as on premise. It's a very all encompassing when it comes to liquor sales and
Yeah.
drinking. I know remote working, especially governments. Again, I'm in Victoria. We're a
Yep.
big government worker town.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our happy hours are definitely a little softer than they used to be pre-pandemic, because you don't have that. Do you find remote working, while it's great for corporations to save some money, do you think that it's directly impacting, and then also business travel directly impacting the hospitality industry?
Well, I mean, one would think so, right? I mean, if you're not going to the office downtown, for example, you're much less likely to meet for an after work, drink or coffee or appetizer downtown, right? And the same thing with business travel, right? I mean, business travel actually is a bit more interesting. It is starting to rebound. It took a huge hit during the pandemic, obviously, as everybody was working from home. But that is the one area that has recovered a bit quicker than a lot of experts predicted. I saw a stat the other day that the worldwide business travel industry is expected to surpass its pre-pandemic levels this year.
Awesome.
It's something like $1.4 trillion. It's an ocean of money, right? But yeah, remote work there's a whole complicated discussion around productivity that you'll find from folks. I mean, Abel's team is mostly remote working. We have actually someone in Victoria who works there, and we're all more lower mainland. But I do think you can see like all those businesses that disappeared during the pandemic because they lost the tourism crowd, the afterwork crowd, the business crowd. They're still suffering to find those customers. The more business travel that happens, the better. There is an interesting kind of correlate to that, though. There's a bleisure market, I think people call it now, where you have kind of business and leisure folks who are they're able to travel because they work remotely, so they can kind of go off to wherever you want to go to the Sunshine Coast and work there for a little bit. It's kind of like leisure activities and work merged together. That doesn't necessarily help the neighborhood pub down the street, right? Just they can meet and is super local, but there's a lot of shifts like that happening in the economy, which is useful to pay attention to.
The big hot topic this year that I've heard from outside of rising costs, because I do feel the cost of inflation is a little bit different in the restaurant and bar industry, is because inflation outside, like for the consumer, has always sort of been like a gradual, but I find in the restaurant and bar industry, it's been a gradual and then a massive spike, and that's where people have been caught off guard, because they're used to it sort of leveling off and being a little bit cheaper than what you can get at the grocery store, but it's been a massive spike this year. But when it comes to labor shortages, are you still hearing a lot of your members complain about labor shortages, complaining about the new generation, that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's a few interesting things there. I mean, so overall, our industry, if you look at pubs, bars, restaurants, liquor, retail, and so the manufacturing industry in BC, a couple 100,000 workers that are in that. Our industry has contracted a little bit, so we were. If we had this conversation last year, I would say we're about 10% short of what we want it to be. And it was really hindering people, right, who were no longer able to be open on certain times of the day or days of the week because they couldn't get enough staff, particularly in the kitchens, right? It's less difficult to find a front house staffer. But demand has softened enough that we're getting by with fewer workers in those places. So our market has contracted a bit, but we are still short-staffed as an industry. The federal government's changes to immigration policies have not helped us. I mean, I get where they're coming from. It does feel like they're trying to address a political vulnerability with policy, which is never really productive. But their point, so if you look at something like temporary foreign workers, about 7% of the market is temporary foreign workers. They want it to be closer to 5%. So they're making policy changes to reduce those workers in the market. I get it, right? But from the industry's perspective, we don't care if you're domestic or foreign, or, whatever your particular preferences are. We just want someone to work in the kitchen who can get good quality product and will show up on time. Right? That's what we want. So I think the labor market is challenging, and there are some things that drive me nuts, though. Like when we speak to government a lot about the work that we're doing and to make them understand what's happening with industry. And Ian Tossinson can tell you all about this, but last year WorkSafe knocked on our doors and started saying, well, your premiums have to go up because we're going to add in tips to your assessable payroll. Like, how can it be payroll when I don't even pay it? And it's coming from the customer. And like, I mean, I get it, a controlled tip in like a banquet facility where it's added as a service charge, but in any case, they would come in and arbitrarily decide how much tips we had collected and add to it. So you're adding costs to our businesses right now and frustration, and they couldn't even explain it well. They've fortunately paused that work. But there's little things like that sometimes go to government with you. Like you're not making our lives any easier. You've got to help us out here. Just stop cutting us with 1,000 paper cuts every single day. And there's other challenges in the changing perspectives of the workforce. It's not 1995. It's not 1955. Workers expect and deserve different practices, and for sure. And I know that's frustrating as an owner to watch your piece of the business decrease. But I do think that was one of the nice things about 2024, the amount of businesses out there that have really started to change their employee practices, shift their workforce management, develop new relationship with their employees, even simple things like using AI management tools to help them plan their day better and do better scheduling, right? Like there's little things you can do to make their lives easier. And that from that side, the labor market's been quite encouraging.
Yeah, the foreign worker policy reminds me a lot of what happened in Singapore. The Singaporean government had invested so much money in their own people, education, that sort of thing. And they did this massive swath of like, you need X amount of Singaporeans in the hospitality industry to have a Malaysian, which is only the country over. And we have a lot of Malaysian people literally drive from Malaysia every day. I had Malaysian workers for me when I was in Singapore. But the thing is the societal norm of Singaporeans is that it's sort of frowned upon. It's like 20 years ago here in Canada. It's like frowned upon to be in the hospitality industry. From your parents, it's like a very like, well, no, you should be a doctor, lawyer, accountant, that sort of thing. And it was really, really tough. I understand in the tech world. I understand in the banking space, but like the hospitality industry, it was really tough to have. It was 3 or 4 Singaporeans for every one outside Singaporean worker, and it was a really tough go to have that as a mix for your staffing, for sure.
Yeah, that would be. And I get the impulse that people have a lot of time to treat immigration as a political issue, but from our perspective, it's just labor supply.
Yep.
And I mean, the easiest way to put it, I remember being in labor market strategy sessions with some government and industries about a couple of years ago, and they were looking at the anticipated labor needs for the whole British Columbia economy over a 10-year period. And it's basically, we needed to find 1 million new workers. And you start to be like, well, where are these people coming from? Some are going to graduate high school, university. That's a percentage of the market. Some are like me. We called interprovincial migration. I came from another province. I moved here. We have retirees re-entering the workforce. And then there's the various immigration streams. But a full 15% of that pie chart was government speak, other supply needed, which is code for we just don't know where we're going to get them, right? Now, those are pre-pandemic numbers, but we were saying 15% of our anticipated labor market growth was not accounted for. We had no idea where they're going to come from. So, like, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's like, man, I just need someone to help me run my business. I'm just trying to create a job for someone here, right? And the allegations of abuses, that is being an ass to your employees is already offside. Yeah. Like, that is not what this issue is about. So anyway, it's challenging.
Do you think, I think we've talked about this before. I think we talked during the pandemic was the big one. Do you think the government is starting to get to the stage where they're understanding just how big the industry is? Because we have people only work 1-2 days a week and they're transitional between high school and university and that sort of thing. I don't think they can really conceptualize outside of like, oh, we have people who work 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. That's how we can do our numbers. And then look at the hospitality space and they just don't get it.
Yeah, I would say this is yes and no. I mean, we spend a lot of time meeting with legislators and politicians and bureaucrats to help them understand all that, right? And, even folks in the tourism industry, like that's even worse in some ways. I mean, tourism contributes more to our economy than fisheries, forestries, and agriculture combined, right? But we don't talk about it with that same weight. So I think the encouraging signs are right when it's not a secret anymore, right? Like we have done enough work over the last few years, particularly coming out of the pandemic, sharing those stats, telling our story. We do it in media, we do it in those meetings so they can understand. the impact of this and how large we are. I mean, we're the fourth largest private sector employer in the province as an industry. Like that matters, right? And although we may be small individually, collectively, we're a $15 billion industry spanning the entire province, right? Like we're the third or fourth largest source of direct revenue to the provincial government as well. So we tell that story a lot. One of the challenges that we do have, though, is your point about being in Singapore and people not considering good career. There's still some of that, so that old school attitude, right? That hospitality is, for the young and your first job. I mean, I'm always surprised to hear that, given I've been doing this job 10 years now. A number of these business owners and their senior staff are my friends, right? And it's not just 20-year-olds who are working in this business, right? People have careers in the hotel industry. So it is something that every association that touches this makes that part of our messaging to government. We're always telling that story. And I'll be honest, one of the encouraging things. So yesterday here in Vancouver, the BC Chamber of Commerce hosted a lunch with the premier and all the cabinet, and a bunch of folks from industry were there. And they do seem to have heard clearly from the electorate that they're expecting you to pay attention to other things, right, and other perspectives, and they're expecting you to work in the business with the business community to try and find some more solutions, because we need some help, right?
Mm-hmm. So with you being directly get outside the massive challenges we've had this year already, liquor laws and regulations in BC have always been a hot topic ever since was the strike was 2 years ago now, 2 years ago in September.
I got to bring that up, give me PTSD. Yeah.
What were the key changes or wins this year for that helped operators for your perspective?
Yeah, so every single year that I've done this job, there have been some changes to liquor policy. We're always tinkering with it. And I'm really proud that as an association, Able BC has been at the forefront of every single significant liquor policy change throughout our history. We won some things for our members last year, but I will say it wasn't like a huge liquor policy changing year. It's not like when we got wholesale pricing for hospitality licensees, or extended the moratorium on new liquor store licenses a couple of years ago. So there's small things. So if you are a liquor store, you're now allowed to relocate temporarily and move back to your initial location, which was a strange little thing. Happened if you were getting evicted because your landlord wants to renovate the building. And if you move somewhere else, you are not allowed to move back to your existing location in some cases. So it was a weird thing, but we fixed that one. And there was also something like the licensee transfer limit. So if you own a couple of pubs and you rented a product at one, you wanted to transfer some of your inventory, you're only allowed to do that up to $10,000 a year. For a lot of people, that's a weekly order, right? So it made no sense. So we got that increased to 100,000. And we just work in the cannabis industry, giving product samples. I think probably the biggest stuff that we did this year was sort of behind the scenes, and were not significant policy changes. Anybody who goes to a pub and plays lotto, for example, will know that they made some changes to the self-serve lottery terminals, and they did not work very well for a while. And industry lost a huge amount of money, drove customers crazy. All right. And we had this little technical issue with them. So they have cash acceptors where you put in your bill, and the machine would spit out the tickets you purchased and spit your money back out. So yeah, little stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we went to work behind there, and we were able to get our members and our businesses compensated for their financial losses during that period associated with the lottery terminals. It ended up being probably $1 million or $2 million to get that done. That's not a significant policy change that people are going to see about. You're never going to be here, in our newsletter, or Jeff on the news saying, we help get $2 million of compensation for our members. But stuff like that in this moment, this environment, is hugely, hugely important. And the last thing I would add is, we did some local stuff, right? So the city of Vancouver has a whole bunch of small policy changes around distance criteria. They had a moratorium on allowing new liquor establishment in certain areas of the city. They had certain blocks of the city were open till 1 o'clock, and across the street were open till 2, and stupid stuff like that. We were able to harmonize closing hours and clean up a lot of those rules. So yeah, this year was mostly working on that. And then we ended up in an election, and as you know, everything stops in an election as you spend time just meeting everybody and explaining to potential new legislators who the heck we are, what we do, and why our industry matters. Right?
Why do you exist?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, coming from Australia, the municipality, I suppose I can say, municipality fingers in the pie when it comes to licensing is very odd for me, because in Australia it's always statewide. You get the liquor license from the state government. The the council, anything like that, can sign off on it, but it's the state runs, or the province runs the laws and what you can do in those laws.
And that makes more sense, right? Unless there's a particular local concern. I mean, how the LCRB, the regulator, works with municipalities is it's quite challenging. I mean, they have to seek local government approval, but a lot of times, like, well, if the bylaws permit it, right? Because sometimes there's additional things, like you can't be, 300 meters from a school or something.
Yeah.
If you're a liquor store, makes sense, but you don't have to approve that every single time. You can just show me the rules, and I'll comply with them. Right?
So, looking forward to 2025, what are the 3 top priorities for ABBC for 2025?
Yeah, so I'll break it down in the different categories of members that we represent. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at our liquor retail members, so liquor retail is always going to do okay, but they're not doing as well as they have been in the last few years. I mean, during the pandemic, all of those hospitality sales, as people are closed, just went to liquor stores, right? So that's about $600 million of wholesale liquor purchases that went from hospitality. They lost like 300 or 400 million of that, went over to retail. You could just see it. But now, folks, most of the year have been down about 10%. Demand is soft across the board. Customers are trading down. Maybe they used to buy a $20 bottle of wine. They're buying a $13 bottle now. And not only do I make less revenue on that, I make less profit. But overall, the policy framework, right, is generally good for liquor retailers. So what they're mostly concerned about is 2 things. We watched, with some horror, as Doug Ford's government in Ontario spent $225 million of taxpayers' money to cancel a contract with the beer store. Cancel it about a year early too, because it was just going to expire anyway. Cancel it for no other reason except to put alcohol sales into convenience stores, to expand in grocery stores and big box stores. So convenience stores, nothing against them, but we have a hard time understanding why government would be interested in moving into those in a place like BC, where we have 670 private liquor stores, over half of which are just run by individuals, like mom and pops, small businesses. We don't have big chains here, right? So we need government. And Mr. Farnworth, when he was a Solicitor General, was clear. But we need our new Minister Begg to tell us he's going to say no to putting alcohol in convenience stores. Our industry can't survive further expansion to grocery. And if something like Costco got liquor sales, that would be the end of private liquor stores here in BC. So that's a big thing. The next one on that is, you would not believe the volume of alcohol being sold from Alberta into British Columbia right now, illegally. So shutting down illegal interprovincial shipping is a huge priority for us. It's starting to impact sales dramatically, and it's costing government money as well, because they're not making their markup on it. Why it's illegal is a whole other complicated thing, which doesn't really make sense, but it is. So that's where we operate. For the hospitality industry, I have to say, government, especially during the pandemic, did some great work to try and help industry. You can always do more, but that's where wholesale pricing came from. That was an $80 million investment into our industry and to our businesses. I mentioned the issues with WorkSafe earlier. We've got a whole bunch of little policy things like that about speeding up timelines for permitting, which the LCRB is working on, and streamlining some of their processes, so I don't have to send in, triplicate paperwork just because you're collecting information for different government departments, right? If I already have a liquor license, why do I have to get another criminal background check, right? But the biggest thing our members are asking for now is a long overdue policy change that we refer to as licensee to licensee sales. Why is it that a liquor licensee over here and a liquor licensee over here are not allowed to do business to each other? What if you want to buy that special Amaro that government stores don't even carry from a private liquor store, and you're not allowed to do it? What if you rented a product on a Friday night and you're like, I've got a customer asking for this, just go across the street and buy it. Legally, you're not allowed. Now that everyone's buying at wholesale, makes no difference from that perspective. And I think it would just be, it's an idea whose time has absolutely come. We can take care of any reporting requirements they want, but it would allow businesses to just negotiate deals amongst themselves, based on service and product selection. And I think it would be really exciting for consumers, right? And it would allow businesses to maybe drive a bit more margin into it. So it feels like that one needs to happen. A couple of things I would say, speaking of, specialty products and fixing the non-stocked wholesale product system, it shouldn't take weeks to get a case of, special ordered wine across the land. I mean, unfortunately, it's a business that government is bad at sometimes. And it should either be privatized or you can deal with it some of it by permitting licensee to licensee sales. A restaurant could work with a private retail partner, but we'll see. I think that that is an area government has been doing some work, and I do expect we'll make progress this year. How it'll look, I don't know. And I know we're not talking too much about cannabis, but I just want to let you know how backwards that industry is still. Like it's getting there, but it feels like we're only halfway to legalization, when simple things like, if you're a liquor retailer and you go to the LDB to buy your liquor, you buy it on your credit card. You're not allowed to use credit cards for wholesale purchases in the cannabis industry. And it's last year, legally licensed cannabis retailers in BC bought $500 million of cannabis from LDB. And we had to buy it all on e-transfers, and a lot of people use credit lines, right? But the credit card, it helps our cash flow, right? Like, it gives me a few weeks to kind of pay this off, so I get it, and then I can sell some of it and use that cash to pay it, as opposed to fronting everything. And additionally, I can use the points on my credit card to expenses or reward employees, right? So they just didn't want to pay the credit card fees. So we've already spoken to the minister about that, and we're saying, what a great way to like show the industry you get it and care. Like, it's a simple thing, right? So those are the kinds of things that our heads are at. And you can go to ablebc.ca and look at our advocacy report, and you'll see a whole list of things that we've been working on and continue to work on for the next year.
Man, you just have so many fingers in every single pie. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how you keep it all in line. The license,
it's tough.
The licensee, firstly, the credit card cannabis thing, that just doesn't make sense. That just sometimes sometimes screams the stigma around cannabis and hard alcohol as like it's still a stigma. Doesn't matter how many policies come into play, nationally, it's still this like, well, we're still going to make it difficult for legitimate business people to do business.
And they don't think of it that way. Sometimes they're like, oh no, it's not a stigma. We just, don't want to pay the credit card fees or whatever. You would never ask another business to do that. Like, what are you talking about? You're making your problem my problem, right? And that is not acceptable in any kind of business environment. Yeah. Imagine if you walked into a hospitality restaurant and they're like, yeah, no problem. You just got to cook your own food in the back. Like, what are you talking about? Why am I here? And you won't allow me to even. Anyway, I'll stop ranting. But yeah,
the licensee sales. I've been screaming about that. I had a conversation with a manager and a manager out of a big distribution company. I won't mention which one. And they're like, "Well, how do we track your sales?" I'm like, "You don't care. Like, I'm not going to be buying cases of vodka from my liquor store, my private liquor store. I'm going to be still putting that through the BCL." I'm talking about that one bottle of something, or that special bottle that a guest asked for. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about case buys. I'm not talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Big orders will still go through BCL. I can still do little orders through the private liquor stores.
Yeah, especially because a lot of BC liquor stores are not particularly good at servicing their hospitality customers. Technically, hospitality businesses are customers of LDB wholesale, serviced through liquor stores. But it's so bad that about a year and a half ago, we started working on the projects. Okay, how do hospitality businesses work with BCL? How are you supposed to work with that? And they, when they told us what their process should be, we found out that about 75 or 80% of their customers weren't doing that process. People were just showing up and buying. So like, hang on, everyone's doing it wrong, and you're still doing it this way.
Yeah.
And we worked on a hospitality handbook that actually helps explain how to do it. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. Like, we're not talking about huge case volumes. Additionally, you've already collected your wholesale markup on that. That's where, about $1 billion of the $1.2 billion the government makes off of industry every year comes from, right? So we're talking about a small amount of profit that would just be shifted in that market. And it would actually save them on labor costs as well. So it feels like a win-win-win, right? But we'll keep pushing on it.
We'll see. So looking forward to 2025. How are you seeing consumer behavior shifting? Is dining out and alcohol consumption trends going to continue rising? Is it going to plateau out? Or do you feel like people are going to change up things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is the question everyone is grappling with, right? So there's some things we know for sure, like delivery is a much larger piece of your business than it ever has been. It's expensive, right? To pay those DoorDash, Uber, skip the dishes fees, 25, 35%. So as customers are doing it, and it's crazy to me how much money people will spend not going out, but spend to order a couple of things at home, even things that don't travel particularly well when they're delivered, right? So the food quality isn't great, but that's what people want to do. They're all about convenience and someone dropping it off to your door without even seeing them. But that has become, it went from a small piece of people's business to 15 to 25% of their sales. So I think delivery is going to continue. I don't know if there's a ceiling on that, but I feel like even in liquor retail, people are doing it more and more. So if you're not doing delivery, you got to figure that one out. The rise of the non-alc category, the non-alcoholic beverage category, has been fascinating. I don't think it's all related to some of that health messaging about, you shouldn't have more than 2 drinks a week and all that. I mean, that's a whole other issue. I think part of it is that, but I think part of it is just people are consuming a little less, right? So they might have, and it's not just like customers who don't want to drink. They're often pairing them, right? They'll come in and have one beer, then a non-alc, then a beer, then a non-alc, so they can stay at the pub for 4 hours and have 4 pints, but only actually consume 2 of them. But I think if you don't have a non-alcoholic like cocktail section in your menu, right, and you don't price them appropriately to make margin out of them, right? Customers, they're not looking to spend $4.95 on it. They'll spend $10, $12, $15 if it's an excellent curated cocktail. So I feel like that trend is going to continue. I think you're going to see a lot of businesses trying to figure out where they can drive margin, and I think that they need to, right? So I was talking to a liquor store the other day who started selling vape pens and like refills on them, just because they're like, well, we needed to compensate for our other losses somewhere else. I think you're going to see the market seems to be differentiating a little bit, right? High end still exists. Oh, there's fewer of them out there, but that's still doing fairly well. Kind of the lowest end of the market, right? The dive bars and all those cheaper places, they seem to be doing fairly well. The middle is really differentiating, and it's all becoming Cactus, right? Or Girls of Joey's, right? If you're punching in that market, you have to be very, very careful of who your customer is, I think, and who you're going after and how you're trying to build that. And I think you're going to see that piece of the market, like it's going to stabilize a little bit this year, because it seems like as businesses shift in there and we try and figure out where people are coming from and what they want to service, like that's the part that's like is going to be missing in the market for the next little while.
Yeah, the Gen Z market, I've been harping on it quite a lot with the non-alcoholic drink movement. My non-alcoholic sales are up 37% over last year.
Right.
Liquor's down 6%. We have a super curated non-alcoholic cocktail menu that one of my bartenders look after.
Yeah, you guys are great at that.
The hard thing is that a lot of non-alcoholic spirits are substantially more expensive than actual spirits.
I know.
Like we have a non-alcoholic bourbon that is $12 more a bottle than my actual well bourbon. Like,
yeah,
so I do take a bit of a hit, but it's necessary.
Yeah, and that's a challenging one, because as more and more customers start to choose that, more and more brands will get active in that market, and we will start to see some economies of scale. But right now, it's essentially a specialty product, right? And I take your point; it can be quite expensive for it. But yeah, you have to. If your idea of a non-alcoholic drink is a soda water with lime in it, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
But haven't you noticed that customers, even though it's more expensive, they will pay it?
Yeah, we charge about $15-16 for a non-alcoholic cocktail, and we have no issues. We don't have anyone complain about it or something like that. You might have the odd person, but they're usually the person who goes for a $5 mocktail and it's a syrup citrus soda.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, we actually milk punch one of our freaking non-alcoholic cocktails. Like, we're not just slapping stuff together. We actually put some love and care into it.
Yeah, and I think that could contend that trend will continue, and I think consumer behavior is going to shift around that. The other thing, I don't know when customers are going to have the pre-pandemic disposable income to go out and continue to dine, right? I have been hearing some encouraging things from the nightlife, the pubs and bars and clubs in there. It's getting a little better. Like that demand was pent up after the pandemic, and then people are like, wow, it costs a lot to go out. But that does seem to be starting to come back a bit. It's just like that, that late night extra drink, extra kind of snack that doesn't seem to exist as much anymore. And I do wonder if it'll be this year that one starts to come back, because I feel like some places are starting to cater to that and customers are getting interested again. That's one of the reasons we're working on getting, legal bottle service here in British Columbia. It's not allowed. You can leave a bottle of wine on the table, but you can't leave a bottle of vodka, because the world's concerned you're going to drink it all by yourself, I guess. And which is, not what happens around the world when other places allow this. Yeah, but it'll be interesting. I mean, I think so much of consumer behavior is really just driven by economic factors that are beyond any of our individual control. Though we can speculate we want, but the real trick here is we need our governments to be spending a lot of time and attention on balancing their budgets and getting their economic house in order, and that will have really positive impacts on the economy overall.
Yeah, 100%. On a personal note, what keeps you motivated to do this? Like you said, you've been doing this for a while.
Insanity.
You've been doing this for a while, and I can see that there's going to be mornings when you wake up and go, "Fuck, I don't want to do this."
Yeah.
But what keeps you motivated?
Well, there's a few things that work for me. I mean, like a lot of people during the pandemic, my job got insane, and I really had to start to pay more attention to my own mental health and how I made sure that I was staying focused and happy and productive. I mean, I try and make sure that I have I've got a good personal life. I just got married a little while ago, and I focus on having good partnerships and good relationships and all that, and that keeps me generally happy. And being motivated to do professionally is an outgrowth of that, I think, right? So, the next piece for me is I really believe in what we're doing, right? I even before this, I spent 10 years working on Parliament Hill, and part of my favorite part of all that was that you get to work on behalf of people, help them carry their message forward to decision makers and get stuff done, right? I like doing good and meaningful work. And at the end of the day, like as I said a while ago, because I've been doing this for 10 years, a number of these people in the business and they're struggling to keep their business afloat are my friends, right? Sometimes I feel like I do this for them. Like this work is too important, it matters too much, and we cannot fail. And I've seen how this can work both here in BC during the pandemic and before that when I worked in politics and on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. What you can achieve when you work together with the right message and the right communication, right? And if I have any skills at all in life, it's as a communicator, and I understand how government works. I get good relationships with people there, and just helping businesses who don't know how to talk to government, like translate their frustrations into something government can understand, and then take what government says, which is inherently weird, and convert that to something businesses can understand, is really quite rewarding. So yeah, I do that. And then the last piece I would say, I'm really proud of my team, the people that I work with. We've expanded in cannabis here, so we hired someone to help us with that. We have a new manager of membership and events as well. And my colleague Anne, who's in Victoria, she runs our communications. But like working with a good team who get it, right? You can teach skills, but you can't teach people to care. They all care so much about this industry, right? And I find that really motivating, inspiring, and we want to do good work for each other. So that's how I managed to get through. And on the days that are tough, because our wins, like our real wins, are few and far between, as you can imagine, right? You don't get wholesale pricing for hospitality licensees every day, right? You don't get takeout and delivery permissions for folks to sell alcohol or a cocktail to go very often. So we take time to celebrate those. And on the tough days, I try and remind myself that it's just a day. It's okay. You just move on. You want to play in the NBA, you're going to lose sometimes. The next day you get back on the court and kind of keep playing.
So one thing that we got to just tie off before I do my 5 deep dive questions is this GST holidays. What's been the feedback from a lot of members about the GST holiday? We talked about it in the green room before we got on.
Yeah.
What's been the feedback on the GST holiday, and how does Able BC feel about it?
Yeah, well, I can tell you it's a lot of questions. And I have joked with a number of people. I wish I could write the federal government a check or an invoice for the amount of time and money that I and my team have spent on this, and every other association that's out there taking the lead, communicating with our members and industry about what this means. It's not that simple in the liquor industry, right? I mean, our point of sale system are not set up to differentiate between an RTD that's 7% or less, or that is more than 7% alcohol. So do we take the GST off or not? Right. And there's questions, even just you and I were talking about resolving recently about, well, what if we have a mandatory tip, like a service charge in a banquet hall? Okay, we don't charge GST on that if it's for the food or the alcohol, but if it's spirits, we should charge GST, right? So people are struggling to figure it out. At the end of the day, this is what the federal government wanted to do to help consumers. It does feel like businesses are the ones paying for it with the amount of effort we're putting into this. Hopefully, it will lead to an increase in sales as some folks kind of come out and spend more money now. I just look at the percentage, though. I mean, the average person is going to spend a couple $1,000s over the next couple of months. So I'm going to save, what, $100? I mean, if I was buying a house or buying a new car during this period, massively beneficial, right? But yeah, it's I don't know that it's going to be a significant win for our industry right now. But that's because just at the moment we're working so hard to get this in place by the 14th, which by the way, it still hasn't passed through the Senate. So people are like, "Am I doing this right?" Like, it's still very frustrating. Um, yeah, and from Abel's perspective, I mean, we don't have like a particular position on this. Our job is to help members understand what to do, explain it to them, make sure that they're set up to go and answer their questions. And as we talk here, my inbox is just glanced at it. I've got 4 messages about this morning, asking questions about a technical change for the point of sale or what it means for consumers, right? So, yeah, it's actually created a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about it. 5% is 5%, but like I'm in two minds. Just I'm just in two minds about how it's going to drive overall. I understand as an industry whole, QSRs and that sort of thing, it's definitely going to be beneficial. But for how much work it's going to take for a full service restaurant bar, it's a little bit of a different animal.
Yeah, it's challenging now. Like, even think of our business cycle. So yeah, we're not going to be paying the GST on our wholesale purchases, but it's not like we're saving that money during that period, right? Because we're not, we just pass those kind of costs on as we go through. So yeah, we're paying a little bit less, so that helps our cash flow a little bit. But then, liquor retail, what if someone comes and returns the product afterwards? And we're trying to, there's a lot of, or some of the stuff we're selling now, or we will be selling on as of the 14th, we've already purchased and paid GST on. Unfortunately, now we're not getting the GST back on that. Do we lose that money, right? And the CRA is, I was on a webinar with them just the other day, and I have another call with someone at the CRA today. They're still creating the answers to these questions, right? So I think, when the Prime Minister announced this, there was probably about 40 million Canadians and businesses and bureaucrats who were all surprised.
So we're at the stage of the podcast, because I usually interview, as you know, a lot of entrepreneurs and industry people. And so this one's a little bit more heavy on the old politics and that sort of thing.
Okay.
But what is one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
Oh, wow. I think maintaining perspective is something that I have learned, that I've talked to my friends and colleagues quite a bit about. I learned a lot of that on Parliament Hill when I worked there. And it is something that frustrates me about current political climate. We turn everything into a team sport. And if I disagree with you, Shawn, I have to hate you. I have often found that if you just try and maintain your own perspective and be like, hang on, this is just what I think, sit down and talk about the issue with somebody else, you'll find you actually agree on a lot more than you think you do, right? The importance of trying to maintain your own perspective. Don't be like, oh, well, this has happened, so I'm a terrible person, or my business is going to fail. Just relax, right? And understand that other people can be right too, right? Like, you can both be right, or you can both be wrong, right? And that's no reason to argue and fight. It's just a reason to try and figure out the best thing to do and go forward.
Yeah, these days it's the same destination, two different routes, and everybody thinks you're on the wrong route.
Yeah. I remember when I was, one of the first bosses I had at Parliament Hill, he was telling me, like, that give me the task to do. And he's like, we'll do it this way. And I was like, well, no, that's not going to work for me. And he didn't conceive of the idea that I could achieve the same result and perhaps better by doing it just a different way. And it's not a better way or a worse way. It's just what worked for me in that context, right? Yeah. The importance of just being open to different perspectives and just, being unemotional about your own perspective as well.
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
I'm a huge fan of Ted Lasso, and he's my spirit animal. But I would say he's got a great line about be curious, not judgmental.
I do love that scene.
Yeah, and I feel like if more people adopted that perspective, the world would be a better place, and you would each be happier.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
I got it fairly soon, but I wish I had known that everything is people. Everything is people. The world moves or not based on conversations, based on words, based on talking to people. Why in the world would anybody in government engage in a multi-month regulatory reform process that's going to take 1,000 hours and involve 10 departments, right? Just because Jeff asked them to? No, it's because you get relationships with people, you understand each other, you help them understand you and what you're doing, communicate clearly with sincerity, and just understand that it's the people, it's not the thing, right? No one cares about random policy. You can't just be like, how dare you, not do this, and do, like, what are you talking about, man? Come and talk to me about it, right? You actually have to go and talk to the people and get them to know. Don't send emails to everywhere, right? Or just call them, talk to them, meet with them in person.
How do you define success, and has that definition changed over time?
Well, my definition of it has definitely changed over time. I mean, I'm 45 now. Just got married a couple of months ago, right? And I'm looking in a very different reality than I did even a few years ago. Success for me is happiness. It's freedom, right? It's being able to do good work that matters, and achieving something like moving the ball forward, right? As long as I'm moving the ball forward, I always feel like I'm, happy, or I'm doing well. I'm succeeding in it. And at the end of the day, I gotta look myself in the mirror every day and make sure that what I have done that day, what I'm doing tomorrow, had integrity to it. Integrity and ethical standards are huge priorities for Able as well. We do good work with the right intentions, and we do it with sincerity. As long as I'm doing those things, I feel like I am successful at what I do. Getting paid, and that helps as well.
What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
I'll be honest, I don't think too much about legacy. And I, at my age and, getting ready to, start a family and all that, I suppose that I will begin to think more about that. I also, when I look at even the impact we've had on the liquor industry in the time that I've been executive director of Able in the past 10 years, people sometimes say, well, nothing has happened, no changes. I'm always like, you screw off for a second, right? Like, I'm literally living this every single day of my life and do it full time. We have made so much progress. I do wish people would take that long view a little bit more often, but I get it. It's hard to do that when you're in there. I don't expect anyone to look back and say, oh, wow, we Able to do much this, or like to think like that. People forget things too quickly. I think I like our legacy where it is in the present right now, that people rely on us and trust us, and that we're dependable. And I want to make sure that, I have no intention of leaving Able, but when I leave this organization, it continues to be a valuable partner for industry that's doing really good work and helping. That we did good work, that we helped, that it mattered, I think is as close as I am at right now.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I always love hanging out and getting time to catch up and chat to you.
It's been a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate you. Thanks for all the insights for 2024 and 2025. So I'll chat to you really soon.
Sounds good, buddy. Thanks again for your time, and I appreciate you too.
Bye. Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up, and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.